Hi, my name's Stewart Lynch, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the new table container view that was introduced in 2021 for the Mac, but this year it was made available also to iPadOS. And this means if you use tables in your project that also support iPhones, you'll have to be aware of the consequences. In this video we'll take a look at the table container along with table columns and see how we can make it work in iOS as well. Tables for iPadOS are still in the early stages and I've encountered some bugs, so I'll offer you some workarounds that help me deal with these limitations. We'll also be reinforcing the use of the iOS NavigationStack and NavigationSplitView containers. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. There is a starter project for this video, and I encourage you to download it and work along with me. That way, once completed, you'll have a working example for reference if you want to implement similar structures in your own apps. The application has a basic shell starting with a tab view that displays two views that we have yet to code. We'll be debugging and checking our progress mostly in the SwiftUI previews, but should you wish to run this on a device or in the simulator, you'll be able to view both views through the tab views. To provide us with some data to work with, I've created a simple model called City that has four properties: name and country, which are strings, and population, which is an int, and then a Boolean is capital property that is initialized as false. In addition, I've created a static property called sample that's an array of these city objects, and I've created 26 cities in 5 different countries and indicated via the setting is capital to true for the capital city of that country. I've also created another static property called countries that's an array of string that is computed by mapping the sample array's country property to an array of string, then using set to remove all duplicates, and then turning back to an array again before sorting it ascending. Now if you're confused by this property here, I encourage you to check out my videos on higher order functions, and I'll leave links in the description. I also recommend that you check out the Apple documentation. It's gotten so much better over the last year or so, and it really has some nice code samples and scenarios that you can investigate. I've found here that a table is a container that displays selectable and sortable data arranged in rows and columns. And the selectable and sortable properties are optional, but we'll get to them eventually. If we're going to be using this array in our table, it means that our city object has to be identifiable. So let's add an identifiable conformance to our struct. And of course, this is going to require that we add an ID property. Well, in our case, all of our city names are unique. So I'm just going to use the name as the ID through a computed property string. And I've also created a very simple view called CityView that displays the city name, followed by the country, and then this population. Then if the city happens to be the capital of a country, I put a star emoji placed behind it, just like we have in this sample city here. So let's get started. Let's open the countries table view and make sure that our simulator is set to an iPad device. Now I always use an iPad Air 5th generation because that's what I own. Well, you can make a table from a static row of data to make up the columns, or you can use a random access collection of data from which to iterate over. And if you want to select that data, it must be identifiable. And we've already done that with our city struct. So first, I'm going to need a state property that will contain that array of city sample data. So to create a table, we're going to start with the overload that requires a random access collection, which is going to be my sample cities, and then some columns in the trailing closure view builder. The columns use the table column struct, and there are a number of overloads here. And the simple one is to use the title key value one. The title key will be the column header, and the value is a key path to our identifiable object's property that you want to display. So let's create one for name, and for the key path, it will be our object's name property. I can duplicate that row now in Xcode 16 simply by typing Command D, and that duplicates the row in the next line, and I can change the title to country, and the key path will be the key path for the country property. Well, our preview doesn't display our results though. First of all, there is no column header, and secondly, there is no second column. It's only displaying the first column. Well, let me run on the simulator. Well, this is interesting, because if I run on the simulator, it looks just as I would expect. 2 columns with 2 headers. And you can see I have my iPad here running in landscape mode. This is very strange, and I think that's a bug. And I did discover a workaround, however, and that is to embed your preview provider inside a navigation stack. Perhaps by the time that they watch this video, you'll not have to do this. So let's add a third column for the population. We'll use the title key for population, and our key path will be population. However, when we do this, we get this error. Key path value type int cannot be converted to contextual type string. So this is a shorthand constructor that we've used, and it generates a text view for our columns for free. If our property is not a string value, we have to use the full constructor, and that is one that provides us with a trailing closure and an instance of an identifiable object. So for this, the title content overload is what we'll be using, and the title key will be the string population, and the content, as I said, provides us with the city, and we can use that to create a text view using the city population in string interpolation. So let's also create one that will display whether or not it is a capital city. And for this, we'll use that same title key content overload, where the title is a capital. It'll provide us with a city, and then we can check the city. If it's a capital, we'll present a star emoji. Otherwise, we'll just use an empty string. Let's just alter the order of this so that the capital column follows the name column. Now that capital star column is far too wide, so we can reduce the width of a table column using a width modifier. And so let's set ours to 60. Well, this is looking better, but I'd like that star to be centered within the column. So I can simply embed that text view in an H stack and surround it with spacers. And in Xcode 14, I've just discovered that the easy way to embed content in another view is to select the content and then simply type the left bracket. And this automatically surrounds the selected content and puts the cursor in front, and now I can just enter H stack. And then surround both sides of that with a spacer. I want to be able to sort on individual columns and have it sorted by name initially. Sorting by name initially is pretty easy. So when we create that array, we'll simply do this by applying the sorted modifier using the key path comparator. And for that key path, we want to use the name as the default. It knows that name is the key path for city because we're applying the sort to an array of city objects. So you can see that the table is now sorted by name. Now I want to be able to sort on other columns or do a reverse sort simply by tapping on the column header. So let's create a new private property that is an array of the key path comparators and just have that single entry that we used for our initial sort. This time we have to specify the object type city to provide the default key path name. So let's add a new argument to our table initializer, that is a sort order, and bind it to that state property. As you can see, this adds sort directional icons to the titles for our name and country columns, as we have specified a value in each of our initializers. Now we'll need to respond to the sort order changes, so let's create an onChange modifier that watches for changes on this sort order. This will provide us with a new value that we can call new order, which will be our new key path, so we can simply sort using that new key path. We've added this modifier to our VStack. Now clicking on those column headers will sort on that column. But what about the population column and the isCapital column? Well, in population, note that we don't have a value specified for that column. But we can simply add one, and it's going to be the value associated with the population key path. And now it solves the problem, and I can sort. Let's try the same for the isCapital. Now I'm running into an issue if I try to sort on the Boolean key path for the isCapital, however. We can't use a Boolean value. So the solution I've come up with is to use a computed property that'll turn this Boolean value into an int. So I'm going to return to our city model, and I'm going to add a computed property that I'll call isCapitalInt that'll return an int and then return 0 if it's true and 1 if it's false. So that's when it's sorted, all capitals will be at the top of the list. Now I can set the value for the capital column to be the isCapitalInt. Now we have sorting on all columns. Let me, in our preview, switch to an iPhone preview, like an iPhone 14 Pro. And you can see now that we're back to this first column only and no column header. It looks like a simple list view, and there's no sorting. Let's switch back to the iPad first and add some navigation. So I'm going to embed our table in a NavigationStack so we can do some navigation when we tap on a row. So I'm going to remove the NavigationStack from the preview provider and add it on our table in the body instead. I can collapse the table and then select it all and then enter a left bracket and then enter the NavigationStack. Easy. Let me try adding a navigation title to this view. And you'd think that you could do that. You could just add it to the table like this. However, this appears to be broken. And I haven't figured out how to add a navigation title if I am embedding a table within a navigation view. This might be another bug. And if anyone has a solution, I'd love to hear it. But I've come up with a sort of a workaround, but hopefully by the time you see this video, it's been fixed or someone has provided a better solution. I'm going to embed that table in a VStack and set the alignment to leading. Then the first item in the VStack is going to be a text field with the string cities. Then I'm going to set the font to large title and make it bold, and then add some padding to the top. Not ideal, but hopefully this will be sorted out soon. And then I'm going to add some padding to the VStack. The next piece then we want to do is to add some navigation to a city view when I tap on a row. So let's add a new state property that we'll call selection that is of type city.capital-ID, and it'll be optional. And the ID property represents whatever we've designated as the ID for our object. And for us, that's that name string. So let's add a selection argument to the table. And it has to be bound to the property that we've just created. but it has to be done before the sort order argument. Now when we tap on one of our rows, it gets highlighted, and that selection property is updated with the ID associated for that row object. Well, we can use this then to navigate to another view using a navigation path. I have 2 videos on the new iOS 16 navigation stack, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details here, but I'll leave a link to the videos in the description. In order to use the new navigation, we must make sure that our city struct conforms to the hashable protocol. Well, this isn't a problem because each one of our properties are hashable. So all we have to do is add hashable to the city conformance. Now back in our view, we can create a state property called path that will initially be equal to an empty array of city. And then I can bind that path to the navigation stack as an argument. Now I mentioned every time that we tap on a row, the selection ID changes. So if we could find out which city that refers to, we could add it to our path and then add a navigation link that will take us there. So let's create an onChange modifier for this selection property. And then we can use an if let selection equals selection to ensure that it's not nil. And then we can let our city be the first sample cities where the iterated ID, the $0.ID, is equal to that of the selection. So this will unwrap it. And then we can append that city to the path. All we need to do now is to create a navigation destination for the city.self, which will give us a city, and then we can present the city view by passing in that city. In the preview then, we can see that it works. We can tap on a row, and I get to the city view, and return and go somewhere else. I do find the preview provider sometimes unreliable right now, so I'm going to run and test on the simulator just to be sure. So on the iPhone, let me tap Belfast and back. Now on London and back. Now let me try London again. I find if I tap on that row a second time, we're not taken to the destination. I have to tap on another row first and then return. So the solution is to add an onAppear modifier so that when the view reappears, we set our selection back to nil. Now we get the first column sorted alphabetically, and when we tap on a row, we're taken to the detail cities view. What we lose on an iPhone, though, is the ability to sort on cities. On the iPad, we have a sort button at the top of each row. What I want to do now is to create a button that will only appear when we are on an iPhone that will allow us to sort it. On an iPhone in portrait mode, all of the views you're using a horizontal class size, and that will always force a collapse of the table view. So fortunately, there is an environment variable for that. So let's create that environment variable for horizontal size class and call it size class. Sorting can be ascending or descending, and by default, our sample cities are sorted ascending. Though this may not be a great added feature to our app, let's give our users the ability to reverse sort on a phone as well. So let's create a new Boolean state property called ascend that's initially true. The environment will tell me what my size class is, so I can add one more view below our city's text view that is conditional based on size class. So let's create a button that will sort based on that ascend property and only be visible on the size class in compact. For the label, I'll use a text view that will first check to see if the value is ascend. If true, our label will be the string sort, and then we can use string interpolation to add an image using the system name arrow triangle down. And then if false, we can use the same string, but change it to arrow triangle up. And I'll also set my button style to be bordered. For the button action, we'll toggle the ascend value and then sort based on that new value. If ascend is true, we'll sort our sample cities comparing our first item's name to see if it's less than the second item's name. Else, we'll just reverse the sort. This works. Let's just take one more step. Let's replace that table column name with the title key content version that'll provide us with the city, and then we can form our own view. Well, if we do that and just use text.cityname, nothing's changed. Well, let's embed that text view in an H-stack and add a spacer on the back side. Still, nothing has changed. I'm going to add a conditional view for when the size class is equal to compact, and then I'm going to add a text displaying the city country, but I'm going to set the font to caption. I'm also going to set the text case to uppercase. Let's view this on the simulator, first on the iPhone. That's great. I'm seeing that added information on the iPhone. Let me switch to run it on an iPad. It still looks good here. Now, we spent a lot of time on this, but I still have more to offer. So if you're still with me, I encourage you to continue watching, where we're going to add a table to a navigation split view. So in this second tab of our sample app, I want to show you how you can use tables within a navigation split view on both an iPhone and an iPad. What I plan to do is to use a two-column split view, which is a sidebar and a detail view, where the detail view is going to itself be a navigation stack. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about navigation split view or navigation stack, as I have those 3 videos on those topics that go into much more depth. If you've not watched those videos, I recommend that you do before completing this video. For the sidebar, I want to present a list of all countries, and when I tap on one, it'll provide me in the details section a table displaying all the cities for that country. But I also want an additional row at the top of the sidebar with a label that says all cities, so that when I tap on it, all of the cities will be displayed in the table view. So let's start with a navigation split view using the sidebar detail overload. In the sidebar view, we'll create a list, and then for the first element in that list, I'll use a text view with that string all cities, and I'll set it to bold. Now you may recall that our city struct, we have a computed static property that generates an array of unique strings that represent the countries for our cities. So below this text view, let's create a for each loop that uses the static city countries array, and since it's a string that will be itself unique, I can use that as its ID, and this will give us the country that we can use to present another text view. I can see we're collapsed in that preview, and I'll have to tap that button to reveal the sidebar, and I want to have that sidebar revealed by default. So I'm going to add a column visibility argument to our navigation split view that should be bound to something, but I'm never going to change it. So I'm just going to use a constant and specify it's a double column. Now, this detail view is actually below the sidebar, and I want it to be always balanced and visible. So I can attach a navigation split view style to the navigation split view and set it to balanced. And then the detail view, let's just add a text view right now that suggests that we tap on an item in the sidebar. When we tap on a row, we'll need to know what to present in the detail view. And this will require a state selection property. Now the thing is, I want to do 2 different things. Either present all of the cities or only the cities for that particular country. So to facilitate this, I'm going to create an enum that I can use for my selection type, and I'm going to call it selection type. Now it must be hashable because we'll be using it to generate our navigation, and it's going to have two cases, all and specific, that will have an associated type which will be an array of all the cities for that particular selected or specific country. So I'm going to create two computed properties. In the first one, I'm going to use it to extract, if I select the specific cities, that array of cities so that we can use them. So we can switch on self, and where the case specific is, we can let cities be the variable and then return them. And then the default will cover all and any unknowns to return an empty array. The second computed property is going to be another string that will provide me with the name of the country that we can use as a navigation title. Well, this is very similar to the first one, except that I first check to see if the cities array is not empty. And then I can return the first city's country since they'll all be the same. Else I'll return an empty string. And then the default case is going to be when we tap on the all countries. So now I can create a selection state property that will be an optional one of these new types. I can bind that now to the selection for our list. To set the selection, we have to tag our rows with one of our cases. So in the first case, where we tap on the all cities, the tag will be that selection type all. In the second case, when we're iterating over the list of names, our tag will be the selection type specific, but that's going to require my passing in an array of cities. And we can find that out by filtering our entire array of city sample by comparing each country to the iterated country. Now, in Detail View, we only want to present the text view if our sidebar selection is still nil. Otherwise, we want to present a table. However, we'll need to know what to present in that table. So let's create a new state property called cities. And that's going to be an array of cities. Now when our sidebar selection changes, we're going to get a new value. So let's create an onChange modifier for that sidebar selection that's going to give us a new selection. And then we can switch on it. And then in the case where we have specific, we're going to get those cities, and we're going to set our cities array, the self.cities, to the cities. And then in the default case, which is going to be the all, we'll set our cities back to the entire city sample. Now we're basically going to copy that same table from our first example. So like the first example, we'll need another property called sortOrder that is going to be an array of keypath comparator, and we're going to use the city.name keypath as default, just like we did in the first view. We'll be able to copy the entire table column section from our first example and just paste it in here, but first we'll need a size class environment property that we can just copy from our first view. So now we're ready to create our table, and that table we're going to iterate over the cities using the sort order that is our sort order. So we can return to our country table view and copy all the columns from the first example, and then paste them in as our new columns for our new table. In order to sort, we'll need to watch for the change on that sort order with an onChange method. And then we can set the cities to sort using that new sort order. We can see here in the preview that it's working on the iPad. Let's switch over to an iPhone. And it's working here. There's one thing that I missed, however, in the last section. When I get to the city view, I see the country, but I'd also like to, on an iPhone, know which one of these cities is a capital. So let's just go back, and in our first column, where we present the city name, I'm going to change this to use string interpolation. And then I'm going to add another string where I first check to see if the city is capital and our size class is compact, because I only want this to be displayed when I'm on an iPhone. And then if so, I can display that star. And if not, it'll just be an empty string, which is what it's going to be on the iPad. So this is so good. Let me go back and just quickly add that to that first view that we created. That's looking much better. Well, we still need to be able to tap on a row to display our city detail. So first, let's embed the entire detail view in a navigation stack. And this is going to be just like our first view. So return and copy the selection and path state properties from there and paste them in here. So let's bind that navigation stack to that path property. And I can add the selection argument to the table, binding it to that selection property, and make sure that you add it before the sort order argument. You can see now on the iPhone preview, we can tap on a city row and it gets selected. We still need the destination. So that calls for a navigation destination method for that city. And so we can do navigation destination for city.self. And that will provide us with a city object that we can pass on to the city view. But we still need to find that particular city and add it to the path. So let's return back to that country table view. And you may recall that we did that in the onChange of selection. So let's just copy it. And then we can paste it in, but this time we'll be locating the city within our cities array. So we have to change this to cities. Testing once more, we see have navigation on the iPhone working. Let me switch to an iPad. And things are looking pretty good here too. Well, just a couple of more housekeeping things if you want to stick with me. I want to have navigation bar titles. Now, since the sidebar view doesn't use a table, I have no problem adding a navigation title to this. If I try to add my computed country name from my sidebar selection as the navigation title on the table view, though, I run into the same issue as before. So again, my workaround is going to be to embed the table in a VStack with the alignment of leading. Then I'm going to add a text view that displays that computed sidebar selection country name, which is optional. So we'll display an empty string if for some reason it isn't. And we'll set it to bold, set the font to large title, and then add some leading padding. Let me test on the simulators now. First on the iPad. This is looking pretty good. Let's run it on an iPhone simulator then. Again, it's looking pretty good. However, there's always something that can come back to bite you. Let me just select a large phone, one that's a Max or a Plus phone. When I run this in the simulator, it looks good in portrait mode, just like it did on the 14 Pro. But let me switch to landscape mode. Well, on these larger phones, the size class is no longer compact. It's regular. And because this is not an iPad, we don't get the table view. We're missing that sort button, and all we're seeing is the first single column. And we're missing the other compact size additions that we made. Now, I could go back and add another check for the device, but the easiest solution for me is to restrict all phones to be displaying in portrait mode only. And I can do that in our target on the General tab and remove all but the portrait mode designation. Running once more, I see that we only display in portrait mode and everything looks great. Well, I hope that you've learned something in this long video and have seen how you can overcome some of the shortcomings or indeed bugs in the table implementation on an iPad or an iPhone. I provided you with some workarounds so that you can take advantage of tables in your projects right now. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Also, subscribe to my channel to get notified of new videos. Thanks so much for watching.